Captain Hansal Kim gripped the metal railing of the bridge as he stared at the massive screen before him. The dark void of space stretched endlessly, dotted with the cold light of distant stars. But his attention was fixed on the enemy fleet floating just 20,000 kilometers away. The Vector ships looked like giant floating crystals, their surfaces reflecting light in rainbow patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. For 3 long years, those crystal ships had brought nothing but death to human worlds. Hansel had watched entire colonies burn under their weapons. He had seen the charred remains of space stations and the frozen bodies of civilians floating in the wreckage. The Vector showed no mercy, took no prisoners, never retreated unless they were forced to. So when Communications Officer Lee Min-ho suddenly straightened at his station, Hansal knew something was wrong. Sir Min-ho called out, his voice shaking slightly. The lead Vector ship is sending us a message. They're asking to surrender. The bridge fell silent. Every officer turned to look at Min-ho as if he had spoken in an alien language. Hansel felt his stomach tighten. In all his years fighting the Vector, he had never seen them give up. They fought until their ships exploded around them. Are you certain? Hansel asked, walking slowly toward the communications station. Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. White flag protocols, cessation of hostilities, request for immediate diplomatic contact. Min-ho's fingers moved across his control panel, bringing up the alien transmission. Strange musical sounds filled the bridge as the Vector message played. Lieutenant. Commander Park Ji-woo, seated at the tactical station, was frowning at her screens. Her dark eyes moved quickly between different displays, checking and rechecking the data. Captain, she said slowly, something isn't right here. Hansal moved to stand behind her chair. What are you seeing? They're power cores, Ji-woo said, pointing to the energy readings on her screen. When ships surrender, they typically power down to minimal levels. But look at these readings. She highlighted several spikes in the data. Their reactors are running at nearly full capacity. That's not normal for a surrender. Hansal studied the information. The Vector ships were indeed consuming massive amounts of energy, far more than needed for basic life support or communications. His mind raced through the possibilities. Were they preparing to run? Were they charging their weapons? Or was this something else entirely? Sir Min-ho said again, they're requesting that you personally come aboard their flagship for the surrender ceremony. They want to meet at the neutral station in Sector 77 Alpha. The neutral station was a small diplomatic outpost built exactly halfway between the two fleets. It had been used for prisoner exchanges in the past. One of the few places where humans and Vector could meet without immediately shooting at each other. But something about this felt like a trap. Hansel looked around his bridge. These men and women had served with him for years. They had fought beside him in dozens of battles. They trusted his judgment, and he trusted theirs. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming that this was wrong. Orders, sir? Asked weapons officer. Kim So-young from her station near the back of the bridge. Hansal was quiet for a long moment. Through the large windows at the front of the bridge, he could see the Vector fleet clearly. Their crystal ships caught the light from the system's star, creating patterns of color that danced across their hulls. They looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But Hansel knew better than to trust appearances. Maintain battle stations, he said finally. All weapons remain hot and ready to fire. Accept their surrender transmission, but keep every ship in our fleet prepared for immediate combat. Sir, Min-ho said carefully, if they're truly surrendering, keeping our weapons active might be seen as hostile. Better to be seen as hostile than to be caught unprepared, Hansal replied. 3 years, Min-ho. Min-ho. 3 years of fighting these things, and never once have they given up. They've destroyed 6 human colonies, killed millions of our people, and shown no mercy to anyone. Now, suddenly, they want to surrender? He shook his head. I don't believe it. Ji-woo nodded in agreement. Captain, I'm going to run a full spectrum analysis of their ships. If they're planning something, maybe we can figure out what it is. Do it, Hansel ordered. I want to know everything about those energy readings. God. And I want constant updates on their power levels. The bridge became a hive of activity as the crew worked to analyze the Vector fleet. Hansel stood at the center of it all, watching the tactical display and thinking. The two fleets faced each other in the silence of space, like two ancient armies preparing for battle. But was it really a battle, or was it something else entirely? His gut told him this was a trap. The Vector had never shown mercy, never given up, never backed down from a fight. Why would they start now, unless they were planning something that would make all previous battles look like minor skirmishes? Sir Jiwoo called out, her voice tight with tension. You need to see this? Intelligence Officer Yoon Hee-jen had been staring at her computer screens for the past 10 minutes, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as she analyzed the strange data coming from the Vector ships. The numbers on her screen kept changing, showing energy patterns that made no sense for a fleet that was supposed to be surrendering. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't notice. Something was very wrong with what she was seeing, and the more she dug into the data, the more worried she became. The energy readings from the alien ships were climbing steadily, far beyond what any normal ship would need for basic operations. This can't be right, she whispered to herself, running the calculations again. But the numbers came back the same, every time. The Vector ships were drawing massive amounts of power from their reactors. Enough to run a small city. She pulled up another screen and began comparing the current readings with historical data from previous battles. The Vector had never shown these kinds of energy patterns before, not even during their biggest attacks on human colonies. This was something completely different. Suddenly, her computer made a soft beeping sound. A match had been found in the intelligence database. Hyejin's eyes widened as she read the information that appeared on her screen. Her hands started shaking as she realized what she was looking at. "Captain," she called out, her voice louder than she intended. The sound cut through the quiet tension on the bridge like a knife. "You need to see this immediately." Hansel turned away from the main display screen and walked quickly to her station. The other officers on the bridge watched as he leaned over. Hyejin shouldered to look at her computer. His face was calm, but Hyejin could see the worry in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Hyejin pointed to the holographic display that showed the energy readings from the Vector fleet. Bright red lines moved across the screen, showing power levels that were climbing higher and higher with each passing second. "They're not powering down for surrender," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're charging something. Something big." Hansel studied the display carefully. Even without technical training, he could see that the energy patterns were far beyond what any ship would need for normal operations. What kind of weapon needs this much power? Hyejin's fingers flew across her controls, bringing up more data. Checking our intelligence files now. Computers comparing these. Energy signatures with known Vector weapons. She paused, waiting for the search to complete. "Captain, I'm getting a match." The computer screen flickered, and new information appeared. Hyejin read it quickly, her face growing pale as she understood what she was seeing. The Velthani extinction event, she said slowly. 2 years ago, an entire species was wiped out when they accepted a Vector surrender. The energy signature from that attack matches what we're seeing now. The bridge became completely silent. Every officer knew the story of the Velthani. They had been a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their art and music. When the Vector had attacked their worlds, the Velthani had fought bravely, but were slowly losing the war. Then, suddenly, the Vector had offered to surrender. The Velthani leaders had been suspicious, but they wanted to end the bloodshed. They had accepted the surrender and begun preparing for peace talks. That was when the Vector had activated their secret weapon. In less than 10 minutes, every Velthani world had been destroyed. Billions of lives had been lost, and an entire civilization had been erased from the galaxy. The Morden species suffered the same fate 18 months ago, Hyejin continued, pulling up more files. And there are reports of at least one other species that disappeared under similar circumstances. The Vector use false surrenders to get their enemies to lower their guard. Then they deploy this weapon. Hansel felt a cold anger building in his chest. He had suspected the surrender was a trap, but this was worse than he had imagined. The Vector weren't just planning to attack his fleet, they were planning to destroy every human world in the entire sector. How long do we have? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. Hyjin checked her calculations again. Based on the current charging rate, I estimate 12 minutes until they reach full power. Once they fire, the energy wave will spread. At near light speed, every human colony within 50 light years will be hit. Lieutenant Commander Giwu had been listening from her tactical station. Now she spoke up, her voice tense. Sir, that includes Earth. The homeworld is only 37 light years from here. The weight of the situation hit everyone on the bridge at the same time? This wasn't just about their fleet or even the local colonies. If the Vector succeeded, they would destroy the heart of human civilization. Billions of people would die, just like the Velthani and the Morden before them. Hansel straightened up, his mind racing. 12 minutes wasn't much time, but it might be enough. The Vector had made one critical mistake in their plan. They had assumed that humans would react like the other species they had destroyed. They thought humans would be trusting, that they would lower their defenses once they heard the word surrender. But Hansel had kept his weapons ready. His fleet was still at battle stations, still prepared to fight. The Vector had revealed their hand too early. All stations prepare for immediate combat, he ordered. It ends now. The moment Hansel gave the order, the human fleet transformed from a defensive formation into a weapon of war. Every ship had been waiting for this command, their crews tense and ready at their stations. What happened next showed why humanity had survived 3 years of brutal warfare against an enemy that had destroyed entire civilizations. All ships, execute Protocol 7, Hansel commanded into his communicator. Throughout the fleet, captains who had been watching the Vector ships with suspicion immediately began barking orders to their crews. Lieutenant Commander Giwu's hands moved across her control panel like a pianist playing a deadly song. Weapons. Lock confirmed on all targets, she announced. Primary batteries charged to full power. On the main screen, Hansel could see the targeting displays showing each Vector ship outlined in red. The computer had calculated the exact location of their power cores, their weapon systems, and their most vulnerable points. The humans had been studying Vector ships for 3 years, learning their weaknesses, preparing for this moment. Sir, called out Weapons Officer Kim So-young from her station. Hidden orbital platforms are coming online. All systems green. Hansel allowed himself a small smile. The Vector weren't the only ones who could keep secrets. For months, human engineers had been placing weapon platforms throughout this system. Disguised as space debris or hidden in asteroid fields, the aliens had no idea they were surrounded. On his personal display, Hansel watched as dozens of new targets appeared. The orbital platforms were powerful weapons, each one capable of destroying a large ship with a single shot. The Vector had walked into a trap of their own making. Charging complete on all platforms, So-young reported. Ready to fire on your command? The bridge was completely silent except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the quiet beeping of computers. Every officer was focused on their job, waiting for the order. That would decide the fate of billions of human lives. Hansel looked at the tactical display one more time. The Vector ships were still charging their terrible weapons, still preparing to wipe out every human world in the sector. They thought they were clever, using humanity's mercy against them. They had no idea that human mercy came with a price. For those who abused it, Fire Hansel said quietly. The universe exploded into light. The UES Retribution shook as its main guns fired, sending streams of superheated plasma racing toward the Vector fleet. Around them, every ship in the human fleet opened fire at the same moment. Kinetic rounds, each one traveling at nearly the speed of light, tore through space like invisible hammers. Energy beams cut through the darkness, painting the void in brilliant colors. But the real surprise came from the hidden orbital platforms. All around the system, weapons that had been disguised as rocks or metal debris suddenly came to life. Massive cannons emerged from fake asteroids, their barrels glowing with power. The platforms had been positioned perfectly, giving them clear shots at every Vector ship. The enemy fleet, caught completely off guard, tried to respond, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had focused all their energy on charging their secret weapon, leaving their defenses weak. Their beautiful crystal hulls, which had seemed so strong in previous battles, began to crack under the massive bombardment. Direct hit on the flagship, Sa Young reported, her voice excited. Their forward section is breaking apart. On the main screen, Hansal could see the lead Vector ship coming apart like a piece of glass hit by a hammer. Pieces of crystal hull spun away into space, each fragment catching the light from the weapon's fire and creating a deadly light show. The other Vector ships tried to complete their weapons charging sequence, but it was too late. Human kinetic rounds punched through their hulls, destroying the delicate equipment needed for their extinction weapon. Plasma beams melted their crystal armor, turning their ships into glowing slag. Enemy power cores are destabilizing, Ji Wu announced. They're losing containment on multiple ships. The Vector fleet was dying. Ships that had terrorized human colonies for 3 years were being torn apart by the very species they had tried to destroy. Their crystal formations, once so beautiful and deadly, were becoming clouds of glittering debris. "Sir," Communications Officer Minho called out, "we're receiving emergency transmissions from the Vector fleet. They're trying to surrender. For real this time." Hansel watched another enemy ship explode in a shower of crystal fragments. The Vector had shown no mercy to the Velthani, no compassion for the Morden, no quarter for any of the species they had destroyed. They had used false surrenders to commit genocide across the galaxy. "Tell them we don't accept surrenders from species that use them as weapons," Hansal replied coldly. "They made their choice when they decided to fake their surrender." The bombardment continued. Human weapons, both from the fleet and from the hidden platforms, poured fire into the enemy formation. The Vector ships, beautiful and deadly for so long, became nothing more than floating wreckage. In less than an hour, it was over. The threat to human civilization had been ended, and the galaxy had learned an important lesson about humanity's true nature. The smoking wreckage of the Vector fleet drifted through space like broken glass, but Captain Hansel Kim was not ready to celebrate. While his crew worked to secure the battlefield, Intelligence Officer Yoon Hai-jin was busy at her station, digging through the data they had recovered from the destroyed alien ships. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with concentration, "I've been analyzing the navigation records from the Vector flagship. You need to see what I found." Amsal walked over to her station, where holographic star maps floated in the air above her controls. Red lines traced paths through space, showing where the Vector fleet had traveled over the past few months. "They didn't come here directly," Hai-jin explained, pointing to the complex route on the map. "They made stops at 3 different systems first, and Captain, these aren't random stops. These are worlds that used to belong to other species." She highlighted 3 star systems on the map. Each one was marked with symbols that made Hansel's blood run cold. The first was labeled as the former home of the Sheltai people. The second had belonged to the Morden. The third was listed as the original territory of a species called the Catheni. All 3 of these civilizations were reported as extinct, Hai-jin continued. The galactic records say they all surrendered to the Vector before disappearing completely. But according to this navigation data, the Vector have been visiting these worlds regularly. They've been building colonies there. Hansel studied the information carefully. The Vector hadn't just destroyed these species and moved on. They had taken over their worlds, built cities on their graves, and used them as bases for further expansion. It was systematic genocide followed by colonization. "How recent are these visits?" he asked. "The last recorded visit to the Sheltai homeworld was just 2 weeks ago," Hai-jin replied. "Captain, there are still Vector living on these worlds. Entire colonies of them, built on the ruins of the civilizations they destroyed." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed this information. They had thought the destruction of the Vector fleet was the end of the matter. Now they realized it was just the beginning. "Sir," Communications Officer Lee Min-ho said quietly, "what are your orders?" Hansal looked around at his crew. These men and women had followed him through 3 years of brutal warfare. They had seen human colonies burned, watched friends die, and fought against an enemy that showed no mercy. Now they were being asked to make a choice that would affect the entire galaxy. "Signal the fleet," Hansal said finally. Going to visit these worlds. All of them. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-woo said carefully, that will take us deep into Vector territory. If there are other fleets out there, then we'll deal with them too, Hansal replied. The Vector have been using false surrenders too. Commit genocide for years. They've wiped out entire civilizations and built their colonies on the graves of their victims. This ends now. The human fleet prepared for hyperspace travel. Ships that had been damaged in the battle were quickly repaired, while others took on fresh supplies of ammunition and fuel. Within hours, they were ready to jump to the first target system. The journey through hyperspace took 6 hours. When they emerged near the Sheltai homeworld, what they found was both beautiful and horrifying. Oh, the planet below was covered in crystal cities that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. But the sensors told a different story. Captain Sensors Officer Kim So-young reported, her voice shaking slightly. I'm detecting massive burial sites all across the planet's surface. The energy signatures suggest millions of bodies. Hansal stared at the main screen, which showed the planet in detail. The Vector had built their cities directly on top of the places where they had buried their victims. Parks and gardens covered mass graves. Shopping centers sat on top of former schools and hospitals. They didn't just kill them, Ji-woo said. Quietly, they erased them completely. There's no trace left of Sheltai civilization. What about Vector forces? Hansal asked. 12 colony ships in orbit, So-young replied. Minimal military escort. Maybe 50,000 colonists total. They're sending us surrender transmissions. Hansal felt no emotion as he heard those words. The Vector were trying to surrender again, just like they had tried to do before attempting genocide against humanity. But this time, there would be no mercy for those who had shown none to others. Target their military installations, he ordered, or destroy their orbital defenses and disable their ships. But leave the civilian vessels intact, sir, Gu asked, confused. We're not them, Hansal explained. We don't murder civilians, but they'll never leave this system again. They can live with what they've done, but they won't be spreading their poison to other worlds. The human fleet opened fire with surgical precision. Vector military bases became craters in the ground. Their orbital platforms were turned into scrap metal. The colony ships, their engines destroyed, could only drift helplessly in space while their inhabitants watched their empire crumble. Next system, Hansal ordered. We have work to finish. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Hansal had ever seen. Representatives from 47 different species sat in curved rows that stretched up toward a domed ceiling painted with stars. The air hummed with translation devices, turning dozens of alien languages into words he could understand. Hansal stood at the center of it all, wearing his best uniform with the insignia of the United Earth Space Force gleaming on his chest. 6 months had passed since the destruction of the Vector fleet. The galaxy was still trying to understand what humanity had done. Honorable counselors, Hansal began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. I stand before you today to present evidence of crimes that have shocked the civilized galaxy. He activated the holographic projector, and the air above his head filled with images and data recovered from the destroyed Vector ships. Charts showed the locations of extinct civilizations. Energy signatures proved the use of planet-killing weapons. Navigation logs revealed the systematic colonization of dead worlds. These records were taken from Vector vessels, Hansal continued. They show clear evidence of genocide against the Sheltai, Morden, and Velthani peoples. Each extinction followed the same pattern. The Vector would attack a civilization, wear them down through warfare, then offer to surrender. When their enemies lowered their defenses to accept the surrender, the Vector would deploy a weapon that could destroy entire worlds. The chamber was completely silent. Many of the counselors had heard rumors about what the Vector had been doing, but seeing the proof laid out so clearly was different. The evidence was undeniable. Counselor Treylin of the Altarian Union was the first to speak. She was tall and thin, with blue skin and large eyes that seemed to see everything. Captain Kim, she said, her voice carefully controlled, while the Vector crimes are certainly disturbing, your response was quite extreme. You have placed 3 entire star systems under permanent blockade. Hansel nodded calmly. That is correct, Counselor. Surely this is too harsh, Traylon continued. You are keeping entire populations trapped on their worlds, unable to travel or trade with the rest of the galaxy. The Vector colonies remain intact, Hansel replied. Their civilians are alive and well. They have food, shelter, and everything they need to live comfortable lives. They simply cannot leave to continue their genocidal expansion. Another counselor, Zephron, of the Theta Collective, leaned forward in his seat. He was a short, stocky being with gray skin and no visible mouth, speaking through a mechanical device attached to his throat. Captain Kim, surely there could have been a more diplomatic solution? Perhaps negotiations? Or a trial through the galactic courts? Commander Yoon Hai-jin, who had been promoted after the event 6 months ago, stepped forward to stand beside Hansel. She carried a data pad filled with intelligence reports and analysis. Counselor Zephron, she said respectfully, in the past 5 years, the Vector have exterminated 3 species, totaling over 2 billion individuals.
Damn.
Each time, they used false surrender protocols to catch their enemies off guard. How many more species should have died while we pursued diplomacy? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They all knew about the extinct species, but none of them had been willing to take action against the Vector. The Belthani were known for their art and music, Hyjin continued. They had created some of the most beautiful sculptures in the galaxy. Amorden were brilliant scientists who had developed new medicines that could have helped millions. The Sheltai were philosophers and teachers who had spent centuries studying the nature of peace. She activated her datapad, and new images appeared in the holographic display. Pictures of Vector cities built on top of mass graves, crystal palaces constructed from the bones of the dead, shopping centers where schools had once stood. Of them are gone, Hyjin said quietly. Erased completely. Their cultures, their knowledge, their contributions to galactic civilization. All destroyed so that the Vector could expand their territory. Counselor Ashrock of the Cathani survivors spoke up. His species had been one of the few to escape Vector genocide, fleeing their homeworld just before the final attack. Captain Kim, he said, his voice filled with emotion. The Cathani Council formally requests that humanity consider establishing a permanent peacekeeping force. Recent events have shown that some civilizations cannot be trusted to honor galactic law. Other voices began to join in. Species after species, many of whom had initially criticized humanity's actions, now spoke in support. They had seen the evidence of Vector crimes, and they understood that sometimes diplomatic solutions were not enough. We live in a galaxy where mercy is seen as weakness, Hansel said, looking around the chamber. Where civilizations use surrender. As a weapon of war, an entire species can be erased while we debate proper procedures. He paused, letting his words sink in. Humanity does not seek to become the galaxy's police force, he continued. But we have proven that we are willing. To do what others cannot, we will protect the innocent, honor genuine surrenders, and show mercy to those who deserve it. But those who commit genocide, who use deception as a weapon, who prey on the weak, will face justice. The vote was unanimous. The galaxy had learned that humans could be the most compassionate of species, and the most terrible when that compassion was betrayed.